What happens when a CEO puts on an apron and finds out his lunch shift is being run like a drill camp? Graham Cole had owned the fast casual sandwich chain for 6 years. He'd bought it from a retiring couple who'd built it up to 5 booming locations across the state. Graham had spent the first few years modernizing operations and expanding delivery, but lately something felt off. Sales were steady, but the latest round of customer reviews from one specific store, the downtown location, felt colder. Not angry, just lifeless. And the employee turnover rate there was unusually high. He'd gotten the usual cycle of reassuring emails from the district manager, but Graham was tired of hearing second-hand fluff. He wanted to see it for himself. So with help from HR, he created a fake training program called Fresh Start, a trial for potential hires re-entering the workforce. He shaved his beard, dyed his hair gray, added glasses, and wore a loose-fitting polo with a stitched name tag. Gary. He looked like someone who'd just left a desk job after 20 years. He'd never met the staff at this location personally, and since the company had grown, none of them had ever seen his face. That made the disguise bulletproof. He scheduled a shadow shift during the lunch rush, disguised as a new part-timer hoping to learn the ropes. The downtown store looked clean from the outside, but inside it felt tense. The music was too low, the air stale. Graham stepped in at 10:30 sharp, greeted by the store manager, Brett. "Ah, you're the new guy, Gary, right?" Brett didn't offer a handshake. He just handed Graham a hat and pointed toward the back. "Yeah, happy to be here," Graham said, adjusting his hat. "No time for chit-chat, lunch rush is nuts, just follow me." Brett was in his early 30s, sharp jaw, shirt tucked tight, eyes always scanning for mistakes. He wasn't rude. But there was something cold in the way he moved and spoke, like he ran the place on autopilot. Graham followed Brett to the prep line, where 4 employees were already scrambling. Orders were flying in. "Gary, you'll be shadowing Natalie. She's on sandwiches." "Watch, don't get in the way," Brett ordered. Natalie was a young woman, probably mid-20s, with dark circles under her eyes and a quiet smile. She nodded to Graham. "Hey, welcome aboard." She moved fast, assembling orders with muscle memory, but her pace was careful. Graham noticed her hand sometimes pressed her lower back between sandwiches. After about 15 minutes, he saw her subtly lean on the counter for a second before straightening back up. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. "I'm fine," Natalie said, too quickly. She forced a smile. "Just 3rd trimester stuff." "You're pregnant?" he asked, surprised. "Yeah, due in 6 weeks," Graham blinked. "And you're working the lunch rush on your feet," Natalie nodded and kept working. "Can't afford not to." Across the line, Brett called out, "Natalie, no leaning, you know the policy." "Standing only on the line. If you need to sit, clock out." Natalie flinched. "Sorry," Graham looked at Brett. "Is that a real rule?" Brett didn't even look at him. "There's one stool in the office, reserved for breaks. We can't have people lounging during service." Natalie's hands shook slightly as she wrapped a sandwich. Graham clenched his jaw. He wanted to say something, but he wasn't Graham Cole today. He was Gary, the new guy, a nobody. The rest of the shift was a blur of orders, spilled sauce, and sore feet. Graham tried to keep up, but he wasn't fast. Natalie quietly helped him several times without making him feel dumb. At one point, a customer at the register asked if their gluten-free sandwich had been prepped separately. Brett answered flatly, "We try, but it's a shared space. If that's a problem, maybe this place isn't for you." The customer walked out. No one said a word. After the rush, Graham found Natalie wiping down the prep area, her face pale, sweat at her temples. "You should sit," he said. Natalie gave a weak laugh. "If Brett sees me, I'll get written up." "How long's it been like this?" Natalie hesitated. "A while. Before I got pregnant, it was manageable, but now, I don't know. He says we're short-staffed, so no exceptions, even when I asked for shorter shifts. I'm just trying to make it to maternity leave." "Why not transfer to another store?" I asked. Brett said no openings. Said if I transferred, I'd lose my hours. Graham's hands curled into fists behind his back. He'd never approved anything like that. He made a mental note to check the employee request logs. He left that shift with two things burned into his mind: Natalie quietly enduring pain for a paycheck, and Brett's cold stare when he barked, standing only. Graham had seen enough for one day, but next time he wouldn't just watch. He'd act. Graham returned the next morning just before opening. No cameras, no entourage, just Gary, the new trainee in a wrinkled polo and sneakers that pinched his toes. The air inside the store was thick with fryer grease and that slight metallic scent of disinfectant that never quite faded from food service floors. Brett barely looked up from his clipboard as Graham slipped through the back entrance. "You're early." "Good." "We're short on prep today," he muttered, already moving toward the walk-in fridge. Inside the kitchen, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. Graham found himself elbow-deep in bins of tomatoes and shredded lettuce, following an impatient line cook's instructions on portioning. Nobody introduced themselves. No one asked him how his first day went. Everyone moved quickly, eyes forward, heads down. A short, wiry man named Darnell handled the protein station, his hands moving with mechanical precision over trays of grilled chicken. Graham watched as he paused, coughed hard into his shoulder, and kept working. "You all right?" Graham asked, carefully slicing cucumbers on the next table over. Darnell nodded once. "Fine, just don't got time to be sick." "You got coverage today," Darnell shook his head. "Brett said if I call off again this month, I'm off the schedule next week. Can't afford that." Graham didn't respond. There wasn't anything polite to say. He focused on slicing, each cut feeling heavier than the last. At 10:35, the front door unlocked. Customers trickled in. By 11, the line stretched halfway to the door. Natalie arrived 5 minutes into the rush. She moved slower than the day before. Her skin was pale, her eyes slightly sunken. But she kept moving, tying her apron as she stepped onto the line. She didn't speak to anyone unless necessary. When she passed Graham, she gave a small nod, no smile this time. Brett barked out orders from the register. "Double wrap on gluten-free. Watch your spacing. I don't want to see a single sauce stain on those wraps today." A teenage girl behind the toppings line flinched when he raised his voice. She looked maybe 16, 17 at most. Her hands shook as she tried to refill the pickles. "Move faster, Emma," Brett said. "You're not at a school picnic. Let's go." Graham leaned closer to her station during a lull. "First week," she nodded quickly, not making eye contact. "Third day. You getting trained?" "Sort of," she whispered. "He just said to watch and not mess up." Graham looked toward Brett. He was back at the register, his jaw tight, arms crossed as he scanned the floor like a hawk. An older customer stepped up to order. She was wearing a scarf over her hair and spoke gently, asking if the soup was vegetarian. "It's got chicken stock," Brett said, not looking at her. "Next." She hesitated, offering a quiet thank you anyway. As she walked away, Graham caught Brett muttering under his breath. Something about always asking the same questions. Graham turned sharply. "What was that?" Brett didn't hear or pretended not to. The line moved on. By 1 o'clock, Natalie was visibly struggling. Her hands moved slower and she dropped a sandwich wrap. She bent to pick it up but stayed crouched for a second longer than expected. When she stood, she pressed a hand to her side. Brett noticed immediately. "You need to go home." Natalie stiffened. "No, just need a break." "Then clock out. You're not paid to rest." She didn't argue. Just straightened, wiped her hands, and kept working. Graham stepped closer. "She's clearly in pain," he said, tone low. Brett didn't look at him. "Then she shouldn't have signed up for this job." Graham's stomach turned. The next hour dragged. Orders came in waves. A register error caused a 10-minute delay. Brett snapped at Emma when she miskeyed a combo. Darnell dropped a full tray of grilled chicken, and Brett made him clean it alone while the rest of the staff scrambled to cover. At 2, the rush slowed. Natalie stepped off the line and disappeared into the back. Graham followed a minute later. He found her sitting on a crate in the dry storage room, head bowed, hands pressed to her belly. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I think I'm having Braxton Hicks," she said, voice thin, "but I'll be fine." "Just need a second. You should go home." "I can't." I already used my shift trade for my last doctor's appointment. If I leave now, he'll cut my hours next week. Graham crouched beside her, careful not to crowd. Do you have anyone to talk to about this? She shook her head. I tried calling HR once. They logged my concern, said they'd look into it. Nothing changed. He stood slowly, rage building under his ribs. His employees were supposed to be able to speak up. Yet here she was, trying not to cry in a storage room while her manager treated her like a broken cog. Back on the floor, Brett was leaning over the register, scrolling through the weekly sales report on the tablet. Graham walked up behind him. I need to speak to you. In the office? Brett didn't move. You're new. You don't run this place. Graham didn't flinch. Now? Brett scoffed but finally followed him to the back. The office was cramped, just enough room for a desk, a chair, and a filing cabinet. Graham shut the door behind them and took off his hat. Brett frowned. What's this? I'm Graham Cole. I own this company. Silence. Then Brett laughed once, short and sharp. You're kidding. Graham pulled out his ID and placed it on the desk. Brett's smirk vanished. You've got 5 minutes to explain everything I've seen over the last 2 days, Graham said, voice steel. Go. Brett's mouth opened, then closed. If you're about Natalie, stop. I saw you force a pregnant employee to stand for 5 hours without relief. I saw you threaten a sick worker with losing shifts. You gave a minor no training and berated her in front of customers. And you just dismissed a woman at the counter for asking a dietary question. I don't want excuses, I want answers. Brett looked cornered. We're understaffed. I've been running this place with 2 fewer people than we need. I can't babysit every new hire. You don't babysit. You lead. She volunteered for the hours she asked to transfer and you blocked her. You manipulated her into thinking she had no choice. Brett's expression hardened. You think you can do better. Try running this place when 3 people call out and corporate still expects numbers. Graham stepped forward, his voice quiet but final. You're fired. Effective immediately. Clean out your stuff. You can't. I just did. Graham stepped out of the office and motioned for Natalie. She appeared hesitantly, eyes red. Can you gather the team? I need 5 minutes. A few minutes later, the crew stood in a loose circle near the prep area. Darnell wiped his hands on a towel. Emma hovered near the back, arms crossed tightly. Natalie stood near the front, still holding her apron. Graham looked at each of them. My name is Graham Cole. I'm the owner of this company. I came here undercover because something felt wrong at this store. What I saw was unacceptable. The room stayed silent. Effective immediately, Brett is no longer with the company. No one here should be afraid to take a break, ask for help, or speak their mind. Starting tomorrow, we'll have an interim manager from another location until we find someone permanent. In the meantime, I want to hear from each of you. I want to know what's not working and what you need. He turned to Natalie. You're off the schedule for the next week with full pay. We'll talk about longer-term accommodations later today. To Emma, he said, you'll get a proper trainer starting tomorrow. You should feel safe here. Then to Darnell. If you're sick, you rest. No retaliation, no lost hours. No one spoke right away. Then Emma gave a tiny nod. Darnell exhaled long and slow. Natalie blinked hard and looked away. Graham didn't need applause. He just needed them to believe him. And that would take more than one speech. The morning after Brett's dismissal, the store opened under a dense silence. No one said much. The air was a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. Graham arrived dressed in plain jeans and a softshell jacket, no longer pretending to be Gary but not exactly the CEO in a suit either. He wasn't here to play boss. He was here to clean up the mess he'd let fester under his name. He stepped behind the counter just before opening. Darnell was already chopping peppers. Emma arrived 5 minutes early, her apron neatly folded in her arms. Natalie had called in, as agreed. Her absence left a visible gap on the line, but Graham wasn't about to fill it with just anyone. A woman in her 40s entered through the back door. Short, solid build, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. This was Rosa, a store lead from one of the highest-performing locations in the North District. Graham had pulled her in personally. "You're here early," he said, offering her a coffee. "That's how I like it," she replied without ceremony. I looked over the shift notes. "You've got 2 people too few for a lunch rush." "Correct. Then I'll be on register and cleaning tables. Don't need a title to work." By 11, the line was forming. Rosa greeted customers with crisp efficiency, calling out names clearly, making eye contact. Within 30 minutes, the energy in the store had shifted. Workers still moved quickly, but not like prey avoiding a predator. They were focused, not bracing for impact. When a customer asked about ingredients, Rosa walked them through the options. When Emma hesitated on the toppings line, Rosa guided her with a gesture, not a word. No one raised their voice. No one rushed anyone into errors. Graham stayed on the floor, tossing trash, wiping counters, checking ticket times. He wasn't interested in being seen, he was watching for cracks. And he found one just before noon. A tall man in a navy jacket approached the front, talking loudly on his phone in a clipped voice. He barely looked at Rosa as he ordered. "No onions, extra mustard, not spicy mustard, regular, you got that?" Rosa nodded. "Yes, sir." He got off the call as his sandwich was being made. Emma handed it to him carefully, repeating the order back. He took one bite standing near the window, then turned back toward the counter. "This isn't what I asked for," he said, voice rising. "Is this spicy mustard?" Emma froze. Graham looked up from the trash station in the corner. "I can fix it," Emma said quietly. The man stepped closer. "You people always mess up the basic stuff. Do you even listen?" Rosa stepped between them. "Sir, we'll remake your sandwich exactly how you like it." The man glared at Emma. "I want someone who speaks English making it." Graham dropped the trash bag where he stood. His voice was low but clear from across the floor. "Leave. Now." The man blinked. "Excuse me?" "You don't talk to anyone in this store like that." "We'll refund you and you'll take your business elsewhere. I'm a paying customer. You're a liability." The man looked around, waiting for someone to take his side. No one moved. Graham walked over, handed him a $10 bill from the register drawer, and held eye contact until the man turned and walked out. Emma stood still, her mouth slightly open. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "You didn't do anything wrong," Rosa said firmly. "He did." Graham waited until the rush slowed before pulling Emma aside near the mop sink. "You handled that better than most adults would," he said. "But I need to ask, has anything like that happened before?" She nodded once. "Who to?" She hesitated. "Mostly me, once to Darnell. Brett said not to make a scene, that it wasn't worth it." Graham felt something settle in his chest, hard and cold. He turned to Rosa. "You good if I step out for 20 minutes? Go," she said. "I've got this." He walked 3 blocks to a coworking space on the second floor of a shared office building. The HR director was waiting there, already connected to a video call. Graham sat down, jaw tight. "I want a full audit of every customer complaint logged at this location in the last 6 months. And I want to see if any employees filed reports that were closed without follow-up." The HR director clicked her keyboard. "You're looking for patterns?" "I'm looking for negligence." By the time Graham returned to the store, the lunch rush was winding down. Rosa had pulled Emma off the line and put her on restock duty, giving her space to regroup without making it obvious. Darnell had taken over the line with a steadiness Graham hadn't seen before. "Any issues?" he asked Rosa. "Nothing I couldn't handle." "Feedback. Emma's got potential, but she's been set up to fail. She needs more than just patience, she needs someone who wants her to succeed." Graham nodded. "You want to stay on here a little longer? I'll give it 2 weeks, but I want to train someone to take over after that." "Deal." Back in the office, Graham opened the employee suggestion box mounted on the wall. It hadn't been touched in months. Inside were folded notes, uncollected. He read them one by one. "Can we please get a stool for the back? My knees are killing me. Why is Brett so mean to the girls? I got yelled at for asking for gloves when cleaning the drain. Please help." The last one was in pencil, no name. By mid-afternoon, Graham called a meeting. Not formal, just everyone in the back, standing shoulder to shoulder between crates of napkins and boxes of sauce packets. "I've been reading," he said. "Not just your logs, your notes, things you didn't think anyone would ever see." He held up the stack of suggestions. "We failed you." "I failed you." This store was allowed to become a place where asking for basic decency felt risky. He looked at each of them. "That ends today. There's going to be change, not all at once, not perfectly, but real and permanent." He turned to Darnell. "I want you on the training team. You know the standard, you never cut corners, we need that." Darnell looked both surprised and uncertain. "You sure?" "Very," to Emma. "You'll be paired with Rosa for the next 2 weeks. Paid training, no pressure, just learning." She nodded, still quiet. "And when Natalie comes back, she'll have options. Because no one should have to choose between their health and their paycheck." No one clapped, no one cheered, but their faces said enough. They were listening, really listening, and for the first time they believed something might stick. After the shift, Graham stayed behind to clean the ice machine. It wasn't glamorous, but it let him be alone for a few minutes. Rosa passed by, wiping her hands on a towel. "Still trying to earn your keep, huh? I've got a lot of ground to make up." "You're doing all right," she said. "Just don't disappear again." "I won't," she paused. "You know, when I started out, I had a boss like Brett. Different face, same attitude, thought fear was faster than training. What happened to him? Got promoted, lasted 6 months, his team burned out, his numbers tanked." Graham nodded. "Let's not repeat that." "No," Rosa said. "Let's not." The store was quiet now, lights dimmed, doors locked. The cleanup crew was wiping the last of the counters. Graham looked around at the space, the same walls, same equipment, same uniforms, but something vital had shifted. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm. And that, he knew, had taken far too long. By the end of the week, the cracks Graham had once seen as hairline fractures were now exposed as structural failures. But what surprised him more was how quickly things began to stabilize, not because of sweeping changes, but because people finally had space to breathe. Rosa had taken charge of the store like she'd been there for years. She didn't need to raise her voice or micromanage. She simply set the tone by doing the work herself. When the first weekend shift started, she walked in early, already in uniform, and started scrubbing the floor mats without saying a word. The rest of the team followed without being asked. Emma was still quiet, still hesitant, but she no longer flinched when someone called her name. She was learning to make eye contact tentatively, but it was happening. Rosa gave her small, direct tasks. Refill the bread bins, label the prep trays, count the sandwich wraps. Nothing overwhelming. And when Emma got something wrong, she didn't get corrected in front of customers. Rosa waited until the rush passed, then explained how to fix it with a calmness that made it stick. Darnell, now officially placed on the internal training team, began creating step-by-step visuals for the prep stations. Nobody had asked him to. He just said one afternoon, figured it might help the next new kid. Graham approved the laminated guides that evening. But not everything had moved forward. The HR audit revealed that Natalie had submitted 3 formal requests for reduced hours during her second trimester. All had been marked reviewed by Brett. None had been followed up by corporate. 2 other employees had filed anonymous reports regarding his conduct, both closed within 48 hours with no documentation of interviews or outcomes. Graham didn't waste time. He met with the HR director on Monday morning in person and restructured the entire complaint handling chain for frontline staff. From now on, all reports from hourly employees would bypass store-level managers entirely and go to a regional employee advocate. It wasn't about optics. It was about insulation, ensuring no one could quietly bury a report again. Natalie returned to the store on Tuesday. Graham was waiting for her in the back, seated on a folding chair with a small manila file in his lap. She stepped through the employee entrance slowly, one hand on the doorframe for balance. "You're early," he said. "I wanted to see what I was walking into." "You're not walking into anything. You're sitting down today." She raised an eyebrow. He stood and offered the chair. "You're not on the floor, you're meeting with me." She sat, her expression wary. "I've reviewed your file, you've never been late, never missed a shift you didn't request in advance. Your customer feedback is consistently strong. Your coworkers have only said good things." She folded her hands in her lap. "So why does it feel like I'm being called into the principal's office?" "Because we failed you," Graham said, "and I need to make that right." He handed her a paper from the file. It was a formal offer letter, same position, same pay, but with a modified schedule. 4-hour shifts, seated prep work only until she began maternity leave. She would be paid for 6 hours per shift. Her eyes scanned the page slowly. "This is real. It should have been real 2 months ago." She looked up. "And after I come back, you'll return to a job tailored to what you want. We'll keep the position open with benefits intact. You'll have input on your hours and you'll have a new manager I trust." She didn't speak for several seconds. "I didn't think I'd ever get a choice," she said quietly. "You do now." Her voice cracked slightly. "Thank you." After she left to get settled into her new station, a seated ingredient prep table Graham had installed over the weekend, he stood alone in the back for a minute, letting that moment settle. Later that afternoon, Rosa approached him while wiping down the entry windows. "Got a second?" He nodded. She glanced back toward the front of the store. "You saw what happened with that delivery, right?" He hadn't. "Third-party driver brought in our produce order, dumped it by the cooler door and left. Didn't even check the invoice. We're missing 2 cases of tomatoes and 1 of onions." Graham exhaled. "We've had 3 missed items this week. Same vendor, same guy. I'll call their rep. If we don't get a different driver, we're switching vendors." She nodded once, then hesitated. "You still want me here after this week?" "I do." She didn't respond immediately. "I'm not interested in running this store full-time," she said. "But I'll stay until you find someone who won't undo what we've fixed. You'll help train them. I'll help choose them." That evening, Graham joined the team for closing. No announcements, no speeches. He just jumped and swept the back hallway, helped Darnell mop, restocked the napkins. At 9:10, the store was clean, the lights dimmed, and the team gathered near the exit in their jackets. Emma turned to Graham before stepping out. "Hey, thanks for backing me up the other day." "You didn't need backing," he said. "You needed someone to not look away." She gave a small nod and left. Graham locked the door behind her. The store was quiet now, but it felt different than it had a week ago. The silence wasn't tense, it was earned, a product of people knowing they could come back tomorrow and not be diminished. The next morning, HR contacted Graham with final disciplinary reports. Brett's termination had been formally processed, and the internal review found clear violations of both policy and labor law. Graham signed off on a report that would block Brett from being rehired under any of the company's brands. Not as a manager, not as a cashier, not as anything. Later that day, Graham met with the regional operations director and handed her a new hiring framework for store managers. It included behavioral screening, peer interviews with frontline staff, and anonymous peer feedback after 60 days. "This'll slow down hiring," she said. "If it means we don't hire another Brett, it's worth it." By the end of the month, 2 more employees from the downtown store had been promoted into assistant training roles. Emma had started helping new hires with register basics. Darnell was developing a week-long onboarding course for prep line workers. Rosa stayed a 3rd week just to make sure everything stuck. One Thursday morning, Graham arrived early and sat in the corner of the dining room with a coffee. He didn't speak, he just watched. The store opened on time. The music was playing not too loud, not too soft. Emma greeted customers with a quiet confidence. Darnell gave a new hire a quick nod of encouragement. Natalie sat at her prep table, slicing tomatoes with practiced ease, a small pillow tucked behind her lower back. No one looked over their shoulder. No one braced for correction. Graham didn't say a word. He just watched the store work. It wasn't perfect, but it was right, and it was his again.